It's 30 plus. It's different. Oh, why is this so loud? All right, recite salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajjil faraja. Sister Minas, can you send out the link? You don't have access to the main groups, huh? We'll ask someone to send it out. Can you ask someone to send it out? In case someone wants to. Oh, I gotta send you the link. Should just be on, yeah, here, let me send you the link real quick. Yes, share. Yeah, you get the link? You should be able to send it to your admin. Assalamu alaikum. All right. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I hope everyone is doing well, inshallah. Hope the weather hasn't been too harsh. So, chai with Shaykh, very similar to coffee with Shaykh. It's not a lecture. It's just a small little talk I'll give. And then inshallah, that's just our intro into the topic. And then we do Q&A. Q&A can be on any topic. Doesn't have to be on this particular topic. The whole idea is to have some time to spend time and discuss different issues, concerns, anything that comes to your mind really. So it's not particular to this topic. But the topic that has been chosen for my portion of the talk is interacting with non-mahrams in the professional world. And when we put out this title, this topic, there were multiple people from the younger generation actually who related to this topic and wanted to be a part of it as well. So at some point we might do a coffee with Shaykh with this topic as well. If they're interning in different places, if they are getting their first job, so on and so forth, this is what they're going to be dealing with very, very early on. So I'll start from here. First thing that we have to understand is that Islam has been very strict on this topic. The issue of interaction between the two genders is a very serious issue in Islam. And when you compare the rules that Islam has compared to some of the other religions you have out there and the other ideologies you have out there, you find that Islam's perspective is a pretty strict one. It's not flexible. And Islam doesn't shy away from that, by the way. Islam's open about this idea, that the rules that we have are pretty strict. To the point where pretty much any type of physical contact between the two genders when they are non-mahram towards one another is considered to be problematic. Of course, there's details about this and we're going to discuss that inshallah. But the only other religion I think out there, or ideology out there that has rules that are this strict, that are adopted in the community sense, is the Jewish faith. The Jewish faith also adopts very similar rulings. Of course, in the Christian faith, you have certain individuals who will apply these strict rulings. You have people who, for example, decide to never marry, for example, but it's not the common thing amongst the community. It's more of this person is making that decision on his own. In the Jewish faith, it seems to be something that's very commonly practiced. So Islam is very, I'd say pretty strict on this issue. When I say strict, it doesn't mean like applying it as difficult all the time. It's not doable. No, it's doable. It's just that compared to the norms that we have within this society, Islam is very, has been very particular about what you can do and what you can't do. That's the first point. The second point, as I go into reading a little bit from Quran and Hadith, what Quran and Hadith have to say about this topic, I will say this. In the age group that you and I are in, this idea of mahram and non-mahram, especially in the professional world, is something that is normally, very much downplayed. Why? Because it's not happening in a casual setting. It's happening in a professional setting. And because of that, the understanding a lot of times is that, well, this isn't going to lead to anything. It's not going to create any problems, If I'm friendly with this person, if I get to know this person, for example, it's not going to create any problems or issues. Yes, if a 20-year-old or a 15-year-old or 18-year-old is getting to have friends from the opposite gender, well, then that's a problem. But in a professional world, it's okay. It's a professional world. Nothing's going to happen anyways. It's unfortunate to say this, but, the reality is that that's far from the truth. The reality is, and I say this because I've been in situations, and I'm telling you this from other communities that I've traveled to, across America, that this is actually more common than we would hope. That in a professional setting, because two people get to know each other and this relationship continues to develop, then later on it reaches a point where it becomes problematic. Families are broken apart, they're torn apart at times. This is not something that never happens. It's something that actually does happen. And I think that's very important to understand. When it comes to our kids, we have this hypersensitivity, right? And it's good, we should be sensitive on this issue. Islam has declared it haram. That same sensitivity we have to remember as we go through our professional world as well. It's a very real possibility. And I have stories to tell. I just don't want to go into those stories right now. They're unfortunate stories, unfortunately. But families have been torn apart because this person thought that in this professional setting, it doesn't really matter, it's just like a thing. And then it developed to a point where now, this person is moving on with his life, or she's moving on with her life, and it creates a whole host of problems. This is why in Quran and Hadith, both the Quran and Hadith are very specific about this issue. In Quran, you seldom find verses of the Quran that get into so many details, right? You have the Makki surahs. Makki surahs are just, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Day of Judgment, all that kind of stuff. إِذَا الشَّمْسُ كُوِّرَتْ وَإِذَا النُّجُومُ انْكَدَرَتْ, the Day of Judgment. Then you have Madani surahs. The Madani surahs, they get into the details of the rulings. But even those that do get into the details of the rulings, seldom do they get into this much detail to draw out the specifics of who you can interact with and who you can't interact with. And this issue of mahram and non-mahram is something that in the Quran you find Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has gotten very specific with it. He's gone into a lot of detail with it, right? This is where we have verse 32 or 23 of Surah An-Nisa. حُرِّمَتْ عَلَيْكُمْ أُمَّهَاتُكُمْ وَبَنَاتُكُمْ. It's a long verse, half a page this verse is, in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says who is haram upon you, meaning who is it that marriage with them is haram upon you, hence making everyone else what we would call non-mahram. And he goes into detail. Oh, this cousin is like this, and this cousin is like this, and this son of your brother or son of your sister, this is okay, but then your cousin is not. These details, the Quran has spent a lot of time on them for this reason, because it's very important for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then when you go further into the seerah of the Prophet, I was listening to a book a couple days ago. It was on the life of the Prophet. And it was explaining how the Prophet dealt with this issue of interaction between the genders. As you know, when Islam came into the picture, it eased a lot of things, and then it also tightened up certain things. Like certain rulings, Islam very much eased, right? On the other side, there were some rulings that Islam tightened up and became even more strict about them, right? Amongst those rulings that Islam made even more strict in Arab society than they were previously was this issue of the interaction between the two genders, right? So much so that now the idea of looking at someone with the wrong intentions is now a problem. This is something that was not known in the culture of the Arab of that time. The same way in this society, it's not even known. In this society, when you look upon someone and you look at them with praise, this is something that's considered a good thing. Even if you have very material intentions, right? This is something that's considered completely normal and just part of your day-to-day greetings, actually. You see someone who's dressed in an appealing manner, and this is something that they expect you to praise this person, to compliment this person, right? So Islam was very strict on this issue, and the Prophet was very strict on this. One of those places that this showed itself, and this is our gateway into discussing some of the more day-to-day applications of this issue, was the idea of shaking hands. Now, shaking hands is like the smallest type of interaction that you can find between the two genders, right? Physical interaction between the two genders. I mean, it doesn't get lighter than just shaking hands, right? Maybe tapping on the shoulder. That's the lighter thing, right? But in reality, shaking hands is the lightest that you can get. And you find that the Prophet was actually pretty serious about this. So when the Prophet made his way back to Mecca, he conquered Mecca after, 10 years of being in Medina. 8 years, eighth year after Hijrah, the Prophet, he came back to Mecca. When he came back, there was a number of people who were now coming to give bay'ah to the Prophet. Because everyone had to give bay'ah now. And these were a lot of them were people who didn't want to necessarily enter into Islam and be part of Islam. But they were entering into Islam now because the Prophet was the dominant power at that point, right? إِذَا جَاءَ نَصْرُ اللَّهِ وَالْفَتْحِ وَرَأَيْتَ النَّاسِ يَدْخُلُونَ فِي دِينِ اللَّهِ أَفْوَاجًا. When you see that moment of victory coming and now everyone is entering into Islam. A lot of these people, they didn't want to. They just went with the flow, right? This is a historical point. And a lot of Bani Umayyah fall under this category, by the way. The Abu Sufyans of the world, they fall under this category. They just, they just went with the flow, so to speak. Nonetheless, when the Prophet, everyone came, he had to do bay'ah. Everyone had to give bay'ah to the Prophet. And there was a particular bay'ah that the Prophet did with the women in Mecca. So obviously, bay'ah, normally the way you do it is you actually shake hands with this person. That's the way you normally do it, right? That's why we read in history with Ghadir, Muslimin stayed in Ghadir for 3 days, and people used to come to Ali ibn Abi Talib and they used to give bay'ah to him, right? That's, of course, our understanding of history. So now they want to come and shake hands with the Prophet, right? And the Prophet, you can imagine what type of a historical moment this is. He's come back to Mecca after so many years, and Islam has become a thing now when no one assumed Islam would ever even make it this far. Now, in this historical moment, multiple narrations that we have in our hadith literature tell us that the Prophet specifically pointed out. He said that the women, I want to do a bay'ah with them. There was a specific bay'ah he did with these women. There's 5 or 6 things that he asked them to do. Which, by the way, shows you the importance of the influence that women have. Because he had already done bay'ah with everyone else. But there was a specific bay'ah he did with the women. And a lot of the issues were akhlaqi issues. Because of the influence that the women would have had on now changing the culture of Mecca, that's been the wrong culture for so many years, now the Prophet wants to change it. So they came, Imam Sadiq tells us that when the Prophet wanted to do bay'ah, he clearly said, I don't do musafaha with women. Musafaha, meaning shaking hands. He said, I don't do musafaha with women. And hence when they wanted to do the bay'ah, what did they do? Multiple narrations say that they had a bucket of water. And this bucket of water was, of course, it wouldn't have been a bucket, but something similar to this that the Prophet used to use to do wudu in, meaning that the rest of the water would drip into it. He took that, he filled it up with water, or asked for it to be filled up with water, and then he put his hand into the water on one side, and then he would ask the women to put their hand in the same bucket of water, and this was their form of bay'ah, right? This is one of the main reasons why within our school of thought, this is one of the ahadith that's referred to by our fuqaha and our maraji', that when it comes to physical contact with the opposite gender, even as it relates to physical contact, even if there are no wrong intentions, even if it's minimal, then it is a problem per this way of the Prophet in his lifestyle, right? So you find that he was very specific about this issue. And I'll never forget, I was second, third year of Hawza. One of my friends called me. He said, come, there's this couple, they've come from, I can't remember which European country they had come from. They had just come to visit Iran, you know. And so I said, he said, come and speak English to them because no one else could communicate in English. So I was like, okay, I'll just go, you know. And I remember we went to this park and it was this couple and they were just asking a lot of different questions, right? And I remember one of the main questions that they asked was, believe it or not, they said, we completely understand why women cover up. That was an interesting thing. So we completely understand why women cover up. You know, it's like it's a modesty thing, all of this kind of stuff. We have no problem with it. But the question we have is that why is it that when it comes to even shaking hands, that you guys have a problem with it? Because in Iran, you don't shake hands, right? And I told them, I said, you know, because the reality is this is such a serious issue for Islam. Islam has set the barrier at the very, very beginning. Islam doesn't set the barrier after this relationship has developed and now they know each other and all that stuff. And then Islam says, well, don't go beyond this red line. That's not how Islam works. Islam wants to stop this from the very beginning. And hence, from the initial interactions that you're having with one another, Islam has a problem with any sort of physical contact. Now, we do have in our ahadith the idea of physical contact through a barrier. That is something that has been mentioned, it's been talked about. Like basically if they were wearing gloves, or even if one party was wearing a glove. And in particular in the hadith it says they are not to squeeze each other's hands when they are shaking hands. These are just details that are mentioned in hadith. We don't know the wisdom behind them. We just go based off of what hadith tells us, you know, and what the texts tell us. But the general idea of just shaking hands, that seems to have been a very clear problem with the Ahlul Bayt. Now, talking about some of the applications, and I'm going to be wrapping up, and the questions that you guys bring up, we'll talk about the applications and all that kind of stuff, because I'm sure you guys have a bunch of different scenarios in mind. But, you know, one thing is just the shaking hands and all that kind of stuff. Hugging is another thing, you know. I don't know how your co-workers are, but depending on the type of co-worker that you have, they might be extra friendly, right? And bless them, they have a good heart, but you're in an awkward position and in a difficult position, right? And then, of course, there is conversations, and then there are, you know, retreats, company retreats, and get-togethers, and, well, we need to build the teamwork, hence we have to get to know each other so much better, and we have to be super kind to each other, and we have to be very, you know, close-knit with one another. These are some of those areas where, Islamically, you might have to draw some lines at times. Just because it's normal within the society doesn't mean that Islam is okay with it. I'll wrap up with this final point. A lot of times, I can't count how many times I've heard this, people will say, well, Shaykh, these were the rules of the past. Islam is a religion that should apply to all times and all scenarios. Hence, if it's something that's being done nowadays and it's being done, then Islam needs to adapt. Or, yes, adapt, yes. Like Islam should adjust because we believe Islam is a religion that applies, you know, 1400 years and counting, right? And that is true, but you're missing that even when the Prophet came, a lot of the things that he brought into society were against the norms. It's very much against the norms. Like we look at drinking, we're like, yeah, no problem. Drinking, we shouldn't be drinking. We're Muslims, we don't drink. But in reality, when the Prophet came to the Arab, drinking was as easy as like, drinking wine was as easy as drinking water, you know? In fact, many of the Arab might have been like, what religion is this? Doesn't he know? Like, this is what we do. So just because it's something we do, just because it's something that's just so common, doesn't necessarily mean Islam has to adjust to that. No, even Islam, when it came into the picture, it got rid of a lot of things that were completely normal. You know, some of them we know of. Some of them are things I'm even embarrassed and ashamed to talk about. But the reality is at that time, there are certain types of marriages that were completely normal at that time. Nowadays, even if you talk about them, you're like, oh my God, this is so embarrassing. It's so awkward to even mention how people were, and Islam had declared them haram. So just because it's norm is not going to be our key in this discussion. We have to go back to our text and see what our text says about this issue. So I'll wrap up there, inshallah. open to questions and thoughts and all that. Doesn't have to be on this topic, by the way. It can be on any topic, and we'll take it from there. And whoever asks a question, I'm going to repeat it so that the live stream can hear. Bismillah.
My question is very basic. How much did I miss?
I don't know when you came. I don't know exactly when you came in, so I don't know.
Did you plan to start at 4 or?
No. We started at 4:30.
Okay.
Something like that.
Very short on purpose.
Yeah. The whole point of Chai with Shaykh is I'm going to keep it short. You guys, questions, thoughts.
I would like to ask a general question when you're
Mm-hmm.
on this, and this reminds me of one time when we had a scholar come in, and he was talking about like why in Shiite you cannot craft, and he was talking about how that's a very common thing in Hanafi, but he was talking about everyone lived in different regions,
Mm-hmm.
so how much of, even though Islam is for all time,
Mm.
do certain regions still try to adapt to that thing? For instance, like in Arab culture, it's very common to kiss people on the cheek. I think the same gender. I am not confirmed on that.
Yeah.
But is it easy to convince someone who is in that cultural upbringing and only knows those Muslims that, oh, this is something you cannot do?
Well, it just depends on how much. So the question the sister's asking is, certain practices that that are already normal for people. How easy is it for them to give up those practices? And the reality is, it just depends on how much they want to practice the religion. At the end of the day, you have to build a culture where you're not learning your religion from culture. You have to learn your religion from the proper sources. If the source says it's not allowed, it's not allowed. And our religion is pretty flexible. Emergencies, situations where, I don't know, if you don't shake hands, it's going to create a serious problem for you. These are allowed, So we have flexible religion, but in a normal situation, just depends on how much they want to practice. Yeah. Yes. Mm-hmm. Sure. Very good. So you guys can pitch in, by the way, with your experiences. So the question was, if someone just approaches you at work and they want to shake hands, how do you basically say no? If they're in high, especially if they're in a higher position compared to you. I mean, listen, it's just, I'll boil it down to this. Scholars have said that if you're in a position where you not shaking hands is going to create serious problems for you, for your job, for your living situation, they say in that particular scenario it's allowed, right? The same way if you have nothing to eat, you can eat pork if that's the only thing that's available to you, right? So that's allowed. But in a normal situation, I would say that's like maybe 10% of these situations. 90% of the time, no, I mean, listen, you're going to have an awkward conversation with your coworkers. It's as simple as that. You're going to have to be like, hey, this is the religion that I follow. It doesn't allow for me to shake hands, right? And it doesn't allow for me to, by the way, it's going to be the same thing when it comes to gatherings that have alcohol, right? Like, a lot of people don't know this. Going to a gathering where alcohol is being served, even if you're not drinking it, and even if you're not sitting at that particular table, is a problem. It's not allowed. So, like, for example, if the company has this get-together, right, and they're serving alcohol, well, the default ruling is that you can't be there. Unless you say, well, I have to be here, I'm going to lose my job, all of that scenario, well, then you go for as much as you have to be there. But the initial ruling. So imagine if it was something that you could get out of with an excuse, you would have to get out of it with an excuse. So my point is there's flexibility for very difficult situations, but the normal ruling on it is that no, it's something that, is not allowed. So going back to you just have to have a conversation with them. Oh, I'm so sorry, I don't shake hands. I hope it's not rude, it's just a religious thing. That's as simple as that, and I don't know, you guys tell me what your experiences have been. My experience, not when I'm wearing this, not at my normal work, but when I like for example, when I went out, when I had moved here looking for apartments, for example, right? You have to go from apartment complex to apartment complex, right? And every salesman or woman wants to shake your hands because they want to make the sale, right? So you have to do that. But every time you do that, the initial thing is that it's a bit awkward. But afterwards, they understand. They're like, okay, it's just a religious thing, and that's it.
I found most of the time they're usually embarrassed that they put out their hand in the first place.
Yeah.
They don't know. And I also never apologize. I never say I'm sorry I can't shake hands because I'm not sorry about it.
See, that's the difference between me and her. I always
So
apologize.
I'm just like, I just say, you know, I can't shake hands with men because of my religion.
Yeah.
And then they're usually like, oh, I'm so, then they apologize.
They apologize, yeah. Yeah, I apologize just because I don't, because they feel like they have to apologize. I apologize that I put them in that situation. But yeah, we don't have to apologize for our religion. It's just that, what they weren't expecting. It's a difficult situation for them,
Can I
So, yeah.
offer a suggestion?
Bismillah.
So based on like when it's with someone who's at a higher level,
Mm-hmm.
at a much higher level, I wonder if it's easier to relate to someone who's in the middle, that you already have a good relationship with them, and they already know such boundaries, and maybe having them preface that.
So in this hierarchy, you tell someone who is closer to you
Yes.
so that they can explain it to others.
Maybe warn them ahead of time.
Warn them ahead of
So
time.
they are not in an awkward position. For example, I have a very accommodating boss.
Mm.
And I believe he knows about how I feel about alcohol and not being around it. So he would probably tell his boss, the vice president, like for instance, the boss gave everyone alcohol for Christmas. He probably would have said, do not give no more alcohol, it would be offensive.
So you didn't get any?
That's a different story or a different problem that I will not share.
Yeah. Yes, you had a question.
Yeah, so I have a question based on, so if you have your husband's friend
Mm-hmm.
or Muslim,
Mm-hmm.
and they know all these things, and they still go to places as like hookahs or
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
honestly, you can't really say no because you're not among the people anymore. And how do you basically, yeah, you can just leave, but they're in the same community, and you're like so like you're awkward person. How do you basically?
Well, I mean, if you're just talking about attending the gathering, I mean, what's wrong with just attending the gathering? If like, what's the specific?
Gathering, and then sometimes some of the places have music, especially Arabic places.
It's a mixed gathering because a hookah place it's a bit different. I mean, it depends what type of a situation we're talking about. If it's a mixed gathering where everyone is mixing together, then yeah, normally that wouldn't be allowed. If it's a place where that's not happening and it's just music, there's a little bit more flexibility on music where basically Ayatollah Sistani says you can attend without intentionally listening. Now, I want to be clear that that's not the recommended pathway, but if you're forced to and all that kind of stuff, that's your way out, that you attend. And even with weddings, he has the same exact ruling as well. And Ayatollah Khamenei has the same ruling as well. So music has a little bit more flexibility. The mixed gathering, it's used in so many different ways. A lot of times people say, I've been in a gathering where we had brothers on one side and sisters on the other side, and people said this is a mixed gathering. That's not what a mixed gathering is referred to when scholars speak of it. Scholars are speaking about it, meaning that this gathering is a mixed gathering in the sense of, men and women are dancing together, they're interacting together, that type of a situation, Which, I mean, I don't know how much of that happens at, like, your typical hookah lounge. Clearly, I haven't been to... Did I get that point across? But, so, yeah, but if it is that type of a mixed gathering, then yeah, attending... If it's to that extent, I would say don't attend, and you need to, I would need to have a discussion with my spouse about, whether it's even a good idea for him to attend or her to attend, because that becomes a family thing at that point, But if it's just the music, then that's something that there's a little bit more flexibility on. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
We went to the restaurant for the dinner.
Yeah.
But there was dancing in the back.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, preferably just. I mean, like I said, we have to be able to stand up for our own rules and values, right? Even with our own friends, you know. And when I say this, this is something I can say confidently because, my relatives, none of them practice the way, our family does, right? So what I'm talking about is just like, it's like just my childhood growing up, basically. I've had so many of these awkward conversations. At this point, I'm used to it. It's basically like, oh, I'm so sorry, we can't go there, you know? And they get used to it, and some of them have enough respect to change the venue for you, and some of them are just like, no, we're going to do it anyways. So, yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah. So again, with the music and the dance, if it's not the people who are dancing, it's dancing separately, right? Then, like what we used to do with weddings is we used to just attend for a small portion of it and then leave. Yeah, I mean, again, going back to the rulings, in this specific scenario, there's a little bit of flexibility there. Um, but let's say if it wasn't that serious, if it's not a brother or sister, because your brother or sister's not going to get married 200 times, right? They're married once in their life. They get married once. The other 9 out of 10 situations, it's a cousin, it's a third cousin, second cousin, I don't know this person. These are situations where I wouldn't suggest staying there for the whole thing. I don't suggest that. And then, by the way, this idea of even being able to attend for a portion of it is if people don't look at you and take it as a sign of you endorsing this, right? So, like, for example, if people know you as the practicing one, and then you're attending, and people say, oh, look, he's attending, so it's fine. We can do whatever we want to do. Then you can attend. This is only if they know, which makes sense for leaving early, because people know, okay, they just came out of respect, and they left early because of that. Yeah, very rare situations where you really, really can't leave. There is flexibility there, but those are for rare situations. It's not for your typical wedding. How many weddings are we gonna attend? There's like a million, right? Like by the time, inshallah, we live 120 years, there's a million of them. Not every one of them is going to be the same hierarchy of importance, right? Some of them are a lot less important than the other ones. You have to also remember you're building culture with your family and your children too, you know? So if the parents go to the wedding and they leave a little bit earlier and say, oh, why are we, well, this music is just, we don't think it's appropriate, for example. The child's never going to forget that, so it's also a teaching opportunity for the children as well. Personal question to the men, yes.
And the reason I bring this up, I have a coworker who is Catholic, and
Mm,
alhamdulillah, very versed in Islam. He knew what Ashura and Molid was, which most of my Sunni friends do not.
wouldn't know, yeah.
But he said in his interactions with Muslim women, he knows what to do. He will not shake your hand, he will put his hand on his heart. But Muslim men have told him, do not talk to Muslim women. And I wonder if that's also the case in companies with Muslim men telling their non-Muslim coworkers, do not talk to Muslim women. And the only reason it's a concern is because if they do not talk, I worry about women missing out on opportunities or being left out in a general sense.
So have you heard anyone in your workplace saying, don't talk to Muslim women just because of these restrictions? No, not really. Yeah.
Would you ever advise anyone to do that in public, like
To just not talk to them?
meaning like don't approach them without reason? I believe not just.
No, I'm sure they wouldn't. That doesn't make sense, right? No, you can approach the person and have long conversations. The Prophet used to have conversations with women all the time. That was the Prophet, of course. He was walking on angels' wings and everything. But with restrictions, he used to have conversations all the time. So you have to have that. It's just that, it's simple. How much of our interaction is physical anyways when you're dealing with a coworker? 1% of it, that's it, So, you just avoid that part, and the rest of it, you just continue normally.
No, that is very helpful.
Yeah.
Not what I grew up with.
Uh-huh.
And most Muslims do
Brothers, you guys have questions? Yeah.
So you're at work, somebody of the opposite gender wants to shake your hand, say that, I'm sorry, my religion doesn't allow it,
Okay.
in simple terms. So then they ask, so what's the philosophy? Simple terminology of that.
Very good question. So the question is, if you're at work, you know, they want to shake hands with you and you say no for religious reasons, and they're like, okay, cool, wonderful, I'm just curious, what's the philosophy and what's the reason behind it, you know? I mean, you guys can add in your perspective on this. One of the things I would point out is that, you know, my religion believes that the interaction between the two genders is so sanct and it's so holy that it's only limited to people who are, you know, either very close relatives of each other or they're married to one another. And it's so special for my religion and it's so holy that it's limited only to those scenarios. So any physical contact outside of that wouldn't be allowed, you know? So basically saying Islam is saying no because of how special it is, not saying no because Islam frowns upon it. This is two different things, you know? Inshallah, when we discuss the topic of music, we'll talk about this. You know, Islam says certain types of music are haram. People say, oh, but it's art, but it's beautiful. Yes, Islam says it's haram because it's so beautiful and because it's so powerful, not because Islam wants to downplay it. So same thing with genders. Islam's not trying to downplay this. Islam's trying to say it's so powerful, it's so special, it has to be extremely limited. And that's why, you know, we limit any type of physical interaction outside of, you know, the realm of marriage or, you know, close relatives like your kin, basically. But I don't know what you guys think about that. What are the other things that you guys might explain as the philosophy of it? Or because there's a number of different ways you can explain the philosophy of it. COVID?
Yeah.
I'll tell you something funny. My mom used to, so we used to have people visiting the house, for example, when we wanted to sell the house, for example. We had people come visit the home and, you know, and my mom used to just grab stuff in her hand. And it's like, oh, I'm so sorry, my hands are full, I can't, you know. But yeah, I think COVID would have been a better, a better thing to deal with it. But yeah, I don't know how much you guys deal with company retreats and get-togethers and things of that nature. I know that that's somewhat common as well.
If you work in a low-level job, you never get to deal with it.
Low-level job.
Well, one thing I was going to ask, along with what you
Mhm.
said about grabbing, if you do shake someone's hand for
Mhm.
reasons you said, is there something you should do? Is it true it is considered najas in Shia?
No.
Okay.
I mean, atheists are considered najis, you know. A mushrik is considered najis.
Yes.
I think in the Sunni school of thought that would be the same case because the Quran says, إِنَّمَا الْمُشْرِكُونَ نَجَسٌ, like they're najis. But I don't know if they have the same understanding of that verse of the Quran. But yeah, only if they're atheists and only if their hands are wet.
So
If it's just dry, then it's not a problem.
redo wudu, like the
No. It just means you have to wash your hand.
Okay.
Yes?
How about eye contact? Like, when you're making eye contact.
Yeah, I mean, looking is just looking. I mean, if you look with the wrong intentions, if someone looks with the intention of lust, that's a problem. It's haram across the board. If you're just looking, then that's okay. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, whatever works for you. Whatever works for you. For some people, they just always look down. For some people, they look for a little bit and then they look down. Yeah, I mean, the idea is that you can't be looking with lust, and if you want to prevent that, naturally, you're not going to be staring at the person the whole time. Yeah.
How do you discipline yourself? Like sometimes you know that shaking hands with them is mandatory. So you sometimes know that you're restraining, other times you're restraining.
Well, listen, anything you do, so the question is, how do you get yourself into this habit of not doing this? And anything you do unknowingly, right? So, for example, I'll give you an example. If you're praying and your child is doing something, and it's not even dangerous per se, right? Because if it's dangerous, you can just break your salat. There's no problem in that, right? But it's not even dangerous. But it's just annoying or whatever. And you're so distracted in your salat, in the middle of your salat, you're like, hey, stop it, you know? Or you do something else that normally would have been problematic, okay? Then this is not considered a sin. So for example, if I've been doing this for the past 20 years and I do it unknowingly just in the moment again, then unknowingly in the moment I did it, it's okay, you know? But the idea is to start getting yourself into that habit, and just, you know, you might have to practice a couple times before the situation comes up, and when the situation comes up, you just have to be okay with being awkward for like 2 seconds. You know, I said this before. I said the most successful people in the world are people who know how to deal with awkward situations. The most awkward people, right? Imagine if you're a president, you have to go shake hands and hold a smile for 5 seconds for all the cameras. It's awkward. You know, you and I can't do this, right? If you're an actor or an actress, imagine how awkward acting is. It's super awkward, right? But this is how people become successful. Your success is also, sometimes you have to be in an awkward situation. You have to look someone in the eye, and even though they expect it to be super friendly with you, you have to say, oh, I'm so sorry, you know, I can't do this. And it's just 2 seconds. And then afterwards, they, you know, and especially in this culture, they're like, oh, this is something special that they have, you know, and now, you know, in some ways you're even more special in their eyes, because like, oh, this person has their own specific thing, you know. So yeah, it's just practice it a little bit before, and then hopefully you get a hold of it in that moment. Yes? The WhatsApp? In which group? In the chai group? Where the link? Oh, on the YouTube channel. Oh, let me check on the YouTube channel.
Is being in a close setting with the opposite gender from work okay? And by that I mean, like, if they have lunch with you
Uh-huh.
on their own, and they are saying it's for business purposes, or if you have to ride in the same car,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I can say oh, this is not against my religion, or is, I just want to know, is there a religious ruling against that?
So the question is, if you're going to lunch with a co-worker of the opposite gender, or you're riding with them, for example, in the same car, is there a ruling against that per se? Per se, the ruling says any type of interaction where man and woman are alone, or in a situation where there's a chance of them, you know, doing something wrong, that becomes a problem. So, for example, if you're in a situation where you are alone with someone from the opposite gender, but there's no chance of anything happening, like you're in an elevator for 30 seconds, you know, and nothing's going to happen, well, you're okay, you're in an elevator, who cares, you know? But if you're in a situation where something might happen, then that becomes a problem, right? So it's very subjective. It's very subjective, you know? But of course, we always want to be super cautious about this stuff. Conversations are fine. Conversations, you keep them to, you know, I mean, I understand when you're working in a company, you have to have some conversations with your coworkers. It's okay. But you just have to know when it's going beyond the normal, typical, you know, we have to get to know each other because we're on the same team. Okay, we have to get to know each other a little bit. But then, you know, I can't be going to lunch with the same person day after day after day after day. Obviously, we're going to build a bond. That's how human beings work. You're not like, you know, you're not like a stone or a rock, right? You have a heart. So like, you're going to build emotions with people. So I don't want to say that having any type of conversation is a problem. No, you can't function like that. You just have to know where to draw the line, and that is where you feel like it's going beyond what is necessitated by my task and by my job, you know, and from that point onwards, you have to cut it off. The question on the YouTube chat is how to deal with company dinner meetings, or even dinner in general, where there is a mixed gathering in addition to alcohol on the table. Listen, the alcohol, like I said, most people don't know about this. Even if the alcohol is not on the table that you're sitting at, this is Ayatollah Khamenei's ruling, it's Ayatollah Sistani's ruling as well. Being in the same gathering where alcohol is being served and people are consuming alcohol is a problem. So again, the default ruling is that it's a problem. Unless it's an emergency, unless you absolutely have to be there, unless if you don't attend this get together, you're going to lose your job, those types of situations, you're allowed to because it's an emergency. Outside of those situations, attending that gathering is not allowed. And that's the specific sensitivity that Islam has on alcohol. Like, if they're consuming pork at this gathering, you just being part of the gathering is not a problem if you're not consuming it, right? Alcohol is something that Islam is so serious on that you can't even be in that gathering, let alone sit at the same table, let alone, God forbid, someone consumes themselves. But yeah. So that should answer that question, inshallah. We can do questions on other topics as well. It doesn't have to be only on this specific topic. You're the only one who's Muslim.
Yes, like on the table.
Yeah. You said everyone, I'm the only one who's non-Muslim. You're the only one who's Muslim on the table, yeah. Sure. Yeah. If you have no other option, then you're like, okay, I have no other option. If there is an option for you to communicate this slowly to them, so that later on, maybe they're considerate enough for you not to do this later on, then you have to communicate it to them. If you know it's not going to have any effect, they don't care at all, they're just going to do their thing, or it's impossible for me to change this culture. Some industries you work in, it's impossible. It's not going to happen, right? So, like, if you know that's the scenario, then whenever you have to be in that meeting, you have to be in that meeting. The second you can get up and leave, then you have to get up and leave. At the end, you're the one who's doing what? Driving home. That's a question we get very often, actually, for people who do Uber. Uber or Lyft or that kind of stuff. Because like Friday night, Saturday night, all this stuff happens. So they always have this question of, is it allowed for me to drive someone who's been drinking back home? Or even taking them to to a place where they would be drinking. But that's a question for another time.
Based on what you just said, you can't even be at the same table. So if your job includes something, like you have to maybe order the alcohol for something, you can simply just say someone else to do it.
Yeah, someone else has to do it. You can't even do that. He can't, but that's only if he knows for a fact that this person is going to this place for this. You never know. Maybe the friend is going there. The wings are good or whatever. I don't know. The food is good or whatever. So ascertaining that is a difficult thing. But if you did, then it would become a problem. Yeah. Sure. It's a lot less likely that they would do it there. Yeah. Sure. So I'll repeat that for those who are watching. The suggestion was to switch from, if you have the opportunity, to switch from an evening gathering to like a lunch or a breakfast thing or a brunch thing, because the likelihood of someone having an alcoholic beverage at those times of the day obviously is less likely.
It's also the company policy
Yeah.
to have it while you're working, typically, so you would not really be allowed to.
You wouldn't even be allowed to sometimes. This is, by the way, the only perk of being a sheikh, by the way, that I have to deal with. There's no other perks. This is the only perk. But yeah. Sure. Like I said, you would look at it, as a situation where I'm not supposed to be here. God is only allowing me to be here because I absolutely have to. And if you look at it that way, honestly, when you're in that gathering, you're never going to be relaxed 100%, and you're never going to be, You're never going to let yourself loose, and you're never going to, so you're going to be there and you're going to feel uncomfortable, and that's completely fine and okay. God wants you to feel uncomfortable in a haram gathering and a gathering where people are drinking and are ruining their marriages and so on and so forth, because in reality that's what they're doing a lot of times, or that's what it leads to eventually. So God wants you to be uncomfortable in that situation. So you're going to be uncomfortable until you leave. Then you're like, oh, okay, now like I can take a deep breath and I can relax a little bit. Same way you go into a place where they're playing haram music. If you have this awareness, you're not going to be 100% comfortable, because you can't like tune into the music, so to speak, mentally. So you're going to listen to it, you're not going to listen to it, but you're going to hear it, but then you're going to be uncomfortable a little bit, and that's fine. And once you head out, then you'll be like, okay, now I'm comfortable, See? Uh-oh. So this is a question you're afraid to know the answer to. This never ends well, but go ahead.
So, for example, like yesterday, I had to go meet some board members, and of course, it was a breakfast meeting, so we were ordering coffee and tea. I said, "Oh, I'll take care of it. I'll cover it." Meantime, somebody comes in and says, "Oh, I'll have some bacon and eggs." I already said I'm going to cover this bill.
Yeah.
Stepping back and say, "Hey, you can't order that because my religion says, what's the rule there for us?"
So the rule on normal haram meat for non-Muslims is okay, actually, per Ayatul Sistani. So like if I want to buy a chicken burger, is that a thing? A chicken sandwich? I don't think that would be a burger, huh? Anyways, a chicken sandwich, that would be okay. It is. No, I don't know if a burger is only with like meat, with beef, huh? Anyways.
It's called a hamburger, but it doesn't matter.
Yeah. Anyways, so you get a chicken sandwich or whatever, that's okay. That's allowed. But when it comes to pork, he has what he calls obligatory precaution not to do it. So what that means is he has not reached a conclusion with regards to that issue yet. And so he's saying, hey, if you want to follow me on this topic, it's not allowed. Okay? But if you can find someone else, another marja to follow on this, you can follow him, because he's saying, I haven't reached 100% conclusion on this topic, right? The problem with the pork thing, in Ayatul Khamenei's ruling used to be something else, and then he's actually switched it to this ruling. So now you can actually sell chicken to a non-Muslim, haram chicken for us to a non-Muslim. But when it comes to pork, again, it's obligatory precaution. Anyways, all of that to say that, technically you can't do it. But now, if it's in a situation where this person has just jumped in the last minute, again, you may not be able to say no to that person in that, because it's going to be extremely rude if you, in that particular scenario, like everyone's ordered already, and this person's like, hey, can I get this? And you're like, no, you can't get that. My religious thing doesn't allow, It's a different thing if you communicate this ahead of time and you're like, hey, religiously I'm not allowed to do this, but if you guys are okay with that, I'll take the tab, right? And I'll take care. That's one scenario, right? But a different scenario is you just go in there and then you're like, yeah, I got the tab. And then when they order, you're like, no, not this, right? So what I'm trying to say is that in that rare scenario, you probably just have to do it at that point. But, the ruling moving forward is that, no, technically it wouldn't be allowed. When I say it wouldn't be allowed, is that these scholars, even they are saying we're not 100% sure about this, but because pork and alcohol, they're the two sensitive things. Because it's such a serious issue, they're like, you probably should take precaution here. Unless you come across a marja who says, I looked into it, I reached the conclusion, it's completely okay. Then you don't follow Ayatul Sistani on this topic, and you follow this other marja. Because Ayatul Sistani did not reach a conclusion on this topic. If he had reached a conclusion, you don't just switch to someone else. You have to follow him, right? But he's saying, I don't know 100%. The problem is I don't know of anyone else who would allow it. That's the problem. So long story short, if it's pork, it wouldn't be allowed unless we have a new marja who comes up and says it would be allowed, which is not unlikely. You never know in 5-10 years. A lot of rulings have changed. People don't know. The reality is a lot of rulings have changed recently. Yes? You want to build on Ayatul Sistani's ruling? Mashallah. Yes.
For the kids, sometimes we're
Same thing. It's the same exact thing, right? So if it would be pork, it would be a problem. But other things would be okay. No, if it's pork, you would just throw it out. Beef or chicken, yeah, you can give it out, yeah. So pork and alcohol are the two areas where there's a lot of strictness. So like if you get chocolate that has, sometimes chocolates have a little bit of, you can't give that to your guest, to your neighbor, for example, or to whoever, You can't do that. But if it's other things, I'll give you another example. If it's something that has gelatin in it, okay? Now, gelatin is a long discussion. I don't want to get into this gelatin discussion and die here. So, but generally, the ruling on it is that it wouldn't be allowed. So, but it's, you don't know if it's pork or not pork or whatever. So that would be okay. And then you can give something like that to your neighbor / whatever. Where are you getting these questions from?
Oh, Shaykh, if you go to the younger group, you're going to have way more questions.
No, I know, but this is on YouTube. Where are you getting these people sending you these questions? Okay, no problem. Bismillah. You're asked at the last minute? So if they ask you at the last minute, depending on the situation, you might be able to tell them, hey guys, I can't pay for this stuff, right? Can I pick up the tab next time maybe or whatever? If it's absolute emergency and you can't do that, well then you do it this time, but moving forward you have to communicate to them that, hey, I just, religiously speaking, pork and alcohol are things that I can't pay for. I'm more than willing to pick up 5 extra tabs. I mean, if you are, I don't know, but I'm more than willing to do this or that, but these two are my red lines and I'm not able to do these two things, So the general idea is that if you're in that situation already and there's nothing you can do about it, well then you just take care of that situation and you go ahead with it. But you have to plan for the future because this is going to come up again. So then for the future dinners that they ask for you to cover the cost, you tell them, hey, I can do it. It's just religiously I have this thing. Yes? What was that? Yeah, that's a tough question. I really don't know. Rastani didn't think of that one. I don't know if it would be possible because you're still facilitating it. And anytime you facilitate alcohol and pork, they have a problem with it. So I wouldn't say it's a problem 100%. I can't know for sure. But out of precaution, I would say no. Just out of precaution. Because you're facilitating it. You're facilitating the purchase of pork and alcohol, basically. Okay, so which is what the scholars have a problem with. Anywhere you are in this chain of pork and alcohol, they have a problem with. So for example, if I'm washing dishes that I know for a fact 110% people are going to be having wine in it, right? They have a problem with that. If I'm taking the cups, the glasses or whatever, right, to the table, they say you're facilitating it. You can't be part of this chain of individuals who are facilitating it. Yeah. Yeah.
Your employees have taken a client out.
Okay.
They submit an expense report that you have to approve.
Yeah.
It probably has, I don't know.
Yeah.
What do you do then?
But you're just approving the expense report. That's not a problem at all.
Report has pork or alcohol on it as
I know, but you're just approving it as an expense.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, that's fine. That's fine. That should be fine. Because this idea of facilitating, it is something that is based on the urf. Okay, urf means how the common society looks at things. Common society, if your job is to approve an expense, people don't say, oh, you see, he gave them pork and alcohol, right? People wouldn't say that, right? So then it would be okay. But when you are, for example, paying for it, people say, okay, he's facilitating it. It's a little subjective. We might look at the same issue and you might have a different understanding on it compared to me, and that's completely fine. For you, it might be allowed. For me, it may not be allowed. The general ruling is you cannot be in a position where you're selling this kind of stuff or giving this type of stuff, pork and alcohol, to a non-Muslim, or you are facilitating it. Now, what qualifies as facilitating? Within society, you'll have to see. In some situations, You might say, no, this is not facilitating. No one says it's facilitating. Okay, no problem. For you it'd be allowed. For someone like me, I'd say, oh no, this is facilitating. It would be a problem. So it's a little bit subjective. Yes. The guys from nail place? Oh, so you're saying some of the guys at the nail salon or whatever, they're not straight. Well, I mean, Islamically speaking, the rulings are just, you go based off of the biological gender of that person, right? So if that person, is identifying as gay, then he's identifying as gay. He's still, rulings-wise, a male. So you can't touch their hand, whatever. Same things. The question was, if you go into a workplace and the people who are there identify as gay, it's a man, but he identifies as gay, how do you interact with him? The answer was you interact with him based off his biological gender, not based off of what he identifies as, right? Yeah. I've heard about it. Okay.
Yellow, orange means it's debatable. They're gonna tell you.
Sure.
Repeat your question and give you answer back. Green means okay.
Okay.
Okay, so we have voted and we are very much into that.
Okay.
Can whenever you go. So over there, the Cheetos
Mm-hmm.
is red. I just went to someone's house yesterday and we were having conversation.
Yeah.
She said no. She said she's gonna send a clip. She said that I don't know the name of the person who like Russia, but
Yeah.
they have allowed that you can eat the Cheetos because when they change their whatever is the position, like whatever is the thing.
Yeah, the substance changes.
Then you're allowed to eat.
So listen, I'll tell you what the general rule is. If you don't know if a food has something haram in it, huh? Yeah, enzymes, yeah. If you don't know if something has something haram in it, if a food has something haram in it, it's better to stay away from it, but technically you can have it. That's the ruling of all of our scholars. If you know for a fact that it is a problem, well then obviously you have to stay away from it. At the end of the day, either you know for sure or you don't know for sure. If you know for sure, you definitely have to do what? Stay away from it. If you don't know for sure, you say, but this halal thing said red, but my friend is saying this, and in your mind you have what now? You have doubt. If you have doubt, better not to do it, but technically you can. It's not a problem. It's not haram. Yeah, it's the same thing. So they can distribute it anywhere, right? Anywhere I come across something, I just ask myself, am I sure this has something haram in it? If I'm sure, I don't eat it, right? If I'm not sure, then I try to stay away from it, but technically, it's halal. This is the only area I've ever seen in our communities, where people don't like that Islam has become flexible. usually people are like, why isn't our religion more flexible? And Islam is saying, listen, if you don't know, it's okay technically. And people are like, no, but why should it be like that? And I'm like, you sure you want the sheikhs to make it more difficult for you? Is that what you're... So, yeah, technically it would be allowed. All right, yes? Sure. Yeah, telling others, you don't have a duty to be going around and telling everyone that this has this or that has that. And to be honest, quite frankly, 8 out of 10 of people who've come to me and said, oh, well, this has this. I've spoken to another person and said, no, that person is wrong. So it's not that easy to reach conclusions when it comes to this stuff. It's okay. You want to do ihtiyat, that's wonderful. Out of precaution, don't have it. That's okay, But you don't have a duty to be going out and telling everybody and, all of that kind of stuff. Your own family, your own children is a different discussion. You might say, well, no, I prefer my children. Your children are your children. You decide how you want to, what rules you want to have in the household. You say, I don't want my children to have this, even if I'm not sure. Okay, that's your family. But other families, other people, you have no duty to be bringing it up to them and all of that kind of stuff. There's some particular scenarios where they say you have to bring it up, but that rarely applies anyways. So, yeah. Yes. Sure.
What's your opinion on, pizzas, before and everything?
He left before pizza went off the table. Listen, when you're driving home, watch Domino's stock price, okay? It's about to fall. I'm just kidding, yeah.
What's your thoughts on
Okay, so the question, repeat it real quick. The question is for pizza places.
places or even subways or
Yeah, a bunch of these places where the food you're ordering is not haram, but najasat can be trans. The general rule is if you don't know what's happening, technically you can have it. It's better to take precaution, but technically you can have it. Simple as that. You don't have to go ask them. You don't have to go look into it. You don't have to peek behind the thing. You don't have to you don't have to do any of that stuff. It's a simple question. Do you know your food is najis or not? And if you're like, that means you don't know. If you have to think about that even for a second, that means you don't know. So then if you don't know, then it's halal for you. You might say, out of precaution, I don't want to have it. Okay, great. Out of precaution, ihtiyat is always good. Say, I prefer not to have it. That's it. But technically it would be allowed.
like in some places you have like cheap pizza and pepperoni and all.
Yeah, there's a lot of that stuff. There's a lot of that stuff, But maybe they change this and maybe they change that. And that's why I'm saying you don't have to even go into all these details. The only thing you have to do is ask yourself a question. Are you sure your food is najis? If you're is, and most times you're not, that's why you're thinking about all these scenarios. Because if you're sure your food is najis, you wouldn't be thinking about anything. You'd be like, this food is najis, I can't have it. That's it, If you're sure your food is najis, it's najis and you can't have it. And if you're not sure about it, and if you have to think about it, that means you don't know. Okay, technically you can have it, but it's good to take precaution. So you want to take precaution, take precaution.
My question is on working in certain industries, and it's special, and I'll use the caveat when there's like some sort of desperation, like you have not gotten a job, because a few places that ask for an interview. And the examples I'll give is if you work for a matchmaking industry, Match.com,
Mm-hmm.
based here, you're facilitating relationships of all kinds, hookups.
Mm-hmm.
Is it okay to take interviews for companies that have those that aren't technically
Working in an industry that technically is haram, like what you're describing, if it was an industry where people were getting married based on their own faith, that would actually may have not even been a problem. But if it's just, casual relationships that people are having, then that becomes a problem. So technically that would be a problem because you're playing an active role in that. Again, it goes back to the same thing we discussed. It's not okay unless it's an emergency, you're going hungry, they're kicking you out of your house, you have no other option, then yeah. Temporarily, what else are you going to do? So it's the same thing. It's just like attending a gathering where they're having alcohol. Same thing. Not allowed, default, but if you're forced, then you're forced and you're part of it until you can find something else. But in our situations that rarely would apply in our communities, but it's possible.
I think, unfortunately, well, like what you said about if you're forced to engage those situations, and
Yeah.
especially like during this economic, and I'll give a
Mm-hmm.
personal example. My mom works in a grocery store. She has to sell alcohol, like
Move it or yeah.
and she asked a scholar this many years ago who said, every time you sell it, that same day you should feel bad about it.
Mm.
It's soba. And I was curious if is that the only option? And that's a necessity because she has to work because it pays for like health insurance.
Yeah, again, if it's a situation where you can't move away from it and anything that is haram in Islam is allowed if it's an emergency and there's no other option. The moment you leave that situation, then the initial ruling comes back, which is that it's haram, and then you have to change it. So if someone says, "Well, I have to work here for a couple months because I can't even make rent and I can't even do," okay, if you have no other option, fine. But after 6 months, you can't just be like, okay, for the next 10 years, I'm gonna do. I'm saying in our school of thought. In the Sunni school of thought, it might be slightly different. The rulings are different. I'm just saying in our school of thought. So yeah, as long as it's an emergency, it's an emergency. When the emergency subsides, then you have to find another option, basically.
May I ask this is not even this is specific thing question.
I'll come back to you. I'll take her question, and then we'll come back to you again. Yes? Sure. Uh-huh. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what the sister is asking is about situations where you're living with your in-laws basically, and the relationships are so close. You're in a house with a non-mahram at times because your husband's brother or your wife's sister, for example, might be in the same house. It goes back to the same exact ruling. The same ruling. The ruling is if these people are non-mahram and they're in a situation where there's a chance of something happening or the chance of something developing, it's not allowed. If it's a situation where they feel 110% sure that nothing is ever going to happen and all that kind of stuff, then it would be allowed for them, you know. So in this scenario, if it's very limited, for example, or it's the husband or the wife is home most of the time, maybe 10% of the time they're not there, and it's very limited and this and that, such that they feel that it's 100% sure that nothing will ever happen, then yeah, technically it would be allowed. But personally, I would say, it's something to be careful about. The brother of a husband is not mahram. The sister of a wife is not mahram. Your cousin is not mahram. I don't know all these different people that we find. Even if you grew up with them, even if they feel like your brother or sister, even if like you're your best buddies, even if all of that, God knew all of that stuff when He said they're haram, right? He knew some cousins would be like best buddies, right? He knew some brother-in-laws would feel like your own brother. He knew that, and He still said it's haram. So there's a reason for it. So I would say be very careful about it, Be very careful about it. All right. Last questions before we wrap up. Oh, your question. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about that. Mm-hmm. But they're not Muslim though, right? But they view Islam. You're saying that you don't want them to view Islam in a strict way. Okay, so this is a topic of another lecture I'm preparing. Okay. But the bottom line of it comes, this is a wonderful question. So I'll repeat the question. The question is, what do you do so that people who are outside of the religion and outside of the faith do not look at Islam as this rigid, backward, strict type of religion? So what I'll say is that a portion of that can be solved, a portion of it will never be solved. What I mean by that is this. There are some things you can do here and there. You can show a person the kindness that you have because you're a Muslim. You can show a person the compassion that you have because of you're a Muslim. You can show them the good customs that you have. You can show them the good akhlaq that hopefully you're portraying. You can do all of that stuff. As Muslims, we normally don't even do that. So we definitely have to do a better job on that side, right? And in our community centers need to be leading the path in that way, right? Like, City of Knowledge right now is very, very young. Inshallah, as it grows, that's part of the goal that we have is, you have to be an ambassador of your faith and of your religion, This has always been part of the plan for myself personally, but it's not number one priority because there are other things we have to take care of first. But, inshallah, in the future, that's what this is supposed to be doing. Shouldn't be something that only the people within these four walls are affected by. So that's one portion of it. That's the portion that you can kind of fix, hopefully change, all that kind of stuff. And we need to do more on that side. The other side is a side that can never be understood, this Islam, a portion of it, can never be understood properly within the context of Western civilization. They are 110% in contradiction with one another. And the reason why is because you as a Muslim, across the board, if you're Hanafi, Maliki, Shi'i, Ja'fari, whatever, right? Ismaili, whatever, doesn't matter. You believe you are a servant and a slave of God. That's your starting point in the way you see the world around you and in the way you practice your faith and in the way you treat your wife and your husband. Everything starts from that. I'm a servant and I'm a slave, so I don't have any say. I have no say. That's the starting point, right? in the dominant culture, in the West and even now in other countries as well, it's becoming the same thing. The dominant culture is that no, you as a human being are the focal point. God is not the focal point. You're not nothing. No, you're everything. You should have a say. It's against my liberties. It's against my desires. It's against what I think. It's against my intellect. If Islam can make its religion look as nice as it wants to look, at the end of the day, if someone doesn't understand and acknowledge that they're a servant and a slave of God, hence they have no say on anything, they're always going to run into a problem, because Western civilization will always say, this makes no sense to my intellect, and Islam will say, guess what? It wasn't supposed to make sense to your intellect. Western civilization will say, this is not what people like, this is not what people consider to be good, and Islam will say, I don't care what people consider to be good or not good. Now, of course, Islam doesn't believe in that in the full extent. What I'm saying is like, things that Islam says you have to pray to me 5 times a day. And you might say, well, based on my intellect, even if I talk to you, it's cool. It's like, no, who are you? You're a servant, you're a slave. That's the beginning of the discussion. So because you're coming at life from completely different perspectives, Islam in its totality will never be fully understood within the context of the society that we live in and within the context of the culture that we live in. It's impossible. It's impossible. Because one of them is saying the human being has to decide everything. Democracy. You have to decide everything. Who's going to be in charge, how you want to run things, what you want to do with your family, my body, my choice, everything. And the other one is saying, no. Your body is not your choice. Your life is not your choice. What you do in your day-to-day life is not your choice. I have to tell you, meaning God has to tell you what to do as a human being. It's a completely different perspective. So to a certain extent, this will never, what do they call it? Schism, whatever the thing, huh? Chasm. This will never be removed to a certain extent. But yeah, on the other side, if you want a coworker to see your religion as something that, well, I don't understand it fully, but they're wonderful people, that you can achieve. And that is something we have not achieved as Muslims, not even close to it. But yeah, fundamentally, no, these are always going to be in odds with one another, because the very starting point of it is at odds of one another, So in our societies, what you are the focal point. In religion, you're not the focal point. Forget about that. You have no role. Like God is like, the Quran says, the Prophet wanted to marry a woman to another man. This man was from a lower class of society. This woman her name was Zainab, was from a higher class of society. The man's name was Zayd. The Prophet, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala told the Prophet to marry them to one another. The Prophet sent someone to Zainab to marry her to Zayd. Zainab initially thought that the person who's coming from the Prophet is coming to ask for her hand in marriage for the Prophet. They said, sure, yeah, wonderful, right? Then the Prophet said, no, this is for Zayd. This is not for me. And then she said, no, I don't want to do this, okay? And this is one of the very rare situations where God had decreed for these two to marry one another. That normally doesn't happen, and even during the time of the Prophet it wouldn't happen. And she's like, no, I don't want this. He comes from a lower class of society. And the Quran, and the verse of the Quran was revealed that when God makes a decree, وَمَا كَانَ لِمُؤْمِنٍ وَلَا مُؤْمِنَةٍ إِذَا قَضَى اللَّهُ أَمْرًا أَنْ يَكُونَ لَهُمُ الْخِيَارَةُ. You don't have a choice anymore. What do you mean? Like, I don't want this, or I want this, or I like. It's not about that. Who are you? You're a servant. You're insignificant. You're nothing. I'm the master. And by the way, Islam, when it says that, when God is saying that, it doesn't mean in a harsh way. It's just how it is. You don't have any existence on your own. He's just telling you how it is. You don't breathe on your own. So he's just telling you how it is. It's just that we as human beings in this society, it's a difficult pill for us to swallow. What do you mean? I was born a servant? Yeah, you were born a servant, Like, you have no rights when it comes to God, technically speaking. You have rights when it comes to other human beings, because they don't own you. They don't create you. But He created you. You don't have own rights. You say, oh, well, this goes against my rights. What rights are you talking about? He's created you. Of course, He is a merciful God. Hence, He has, been kind to us and given us all these blessings and everything. But anyways, long story short, these two are always going to be at odds with one another to a certain extent. So they'll never look at you and say, well, yeah, I think hijab makes sense to me. They might look at it and say, yeah, it's a good form of modesty, but am I really going to put myself through all the trouble of it? No. So, yeah, that's the basic answer. I don't know if that was basic, but it took too long. Inshallah. All right. Thank you very much. Recite aloud salawat, please. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ali Muhammad wa ajil